Okay, there we go.
Okay. So hello, everybody. I am Jennifer McGillan. I'm the coordinator of manuscripts at Mississippi State. And what I'm be talking about today, I have called Mid-Century Modern with a Tangy Twist, Cooking with Ketchup. So this is it. This is the cookbook. I saw someone in the chat has actually eaten recipes from this, and I'm fascinated by that. So the format of this little adventure was to do a close reading of this cookbook as a historical document, and to consider the text, subtext, taste, and texture of the recipes presented here. So the first question I asked was, who made this and why? So it's produced by H.J. Heinz and Company, which is makers of Heinz Ketchup and other food products. It was a promotional item, so I kind of made the assumption that the primary purpose is to sell ketchup and or promote the brand. And there were some synergies involved here. There are 57 recipes for Heinz 57, and it was published in 1957. So there was probably some PR, galaxy brain stuff going on with this. And then the audience, who is this for? Consumers making food buying and cooking decisions, so probably predominantly women. Food pages and women's pages editors and writers for whom it would have been a source of copy and story ideas. I did see a number of articles where they reproduced the text of the recipes from the cookbook, just totally reproduced them. Grocery stores, there was a source of advertising suggestions and ideas. I did see some ads for specific stores that also reproduced text of recipes. And also home economists, extension agents, or anyone teaching cooking skills or meal preparation. My library's copy of this cookbook came over with a donation from Extension. So the first time I saw it was when it landed on my desk as, here are some cookbooks, what do we do with these? And I was sort of flipping through it like, what is this? I hesitated. I almost did not get a catalog, but then I decided I would do it. Okay, so my main question was, is this functional as a cookbook? And the answer is both yes. At least some of the recipes are edible. Some of them are really good. And no, it's printed on clay paper or magazine paper. So if and when it gets wet, if you don't notice and immediately and dry it, it will be ruined because the pages will dry, they will stick together, and then you either can't get to the recipe you are using, or if you try and pry the pages apart, they will stick together. So it's a very impractical thing to have in the kitchen. So they sort of went line by line, starting with the 57 prize-winning recipes. This is essentially accurate, but only 53 of them use ketchup, 4 use chili sauce. And the prize-winning requires some unpacking. There were actually 2 contests I discovered. There was a Cook with Ketchup contest in 1955, and a Name That Recipe contest in 1956, and cash prizes were awarded to all of the winners, but I'm not 100% certain that all of the recipes in the cookbook won prizes. I have my doubts there. So inside the front cover, first of all, you have this giant, terrifying tomato chef, right? But the other thing, if you're looking a little bit longer, kind of was, okay, so we have some formal chef's whites here and a monocle. So, and the longer I stare at this, the more I was kind of wondering if this was an echo of Mr. Peanut and his monocle and spats, and a kind of subtle nod to classing up the joint and trying to elevate ketchup to a more formal food plane, I guess. And then you have the lady who looks like one of the Jetsons in her very nice outfit and holding this, look, here's the jar of ketchup next to his magic wand. So then the next thing down being the author's statement, or as close as you're going to get to one, it says Heinz Home Economics Department. So I was like, wait, hold up. What happened to the prize winners? And then as you go through, you notice there's no names on the recipes. And in contrast, for example, the Pillsbury Bake Off winners, they got their names in the cookbooks, and they're still there on the website. So they get their names, and maybe not ownership of the recipes, but they get credit for them in some way. And I did see in one of the articles about the contest that I found, newspaper articles, they did mention that the prize-winning recipes had been tested or sort of adjusted by the Heinz home economics department to make sure they could be cooked in home kitchens. So so I kind of wonder if some of these recipes were also generated by the Heinz home economics department. And that's why I'm saying I'm not really sure that all of these recipes were prize winners. All right, so hunting for the prize winners. That was my first prong of research. The Heinz History Center archives in Pittsburgh was, if they were fully closed or mostly closed, when I got started with this back in March due to the pandemic. So I had to get a little bit creative. So I made a spreadsheet of all the recipes by title as in the order in which they appeared in the cookbook. And I did a Google search for Cook with Ketchup contest. I found one prize winner certificate for a merchant, but no dish listed, which I had been kind of dubious about there even being a contest at first. But so this certificate convinced me that there was in fact a contest. And then from Google, I switched to Chronicling America and newspapers.com with a variety of terms, including dish titles and unique ingredients. And sometimes the unique ingredient was ketchup. And then I did find several of them. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about now. So the prize winners I found, and one thing that I did want to note is that I'm going to say about 80% of these women, when they were mentioned in the newspaper article, were mentioned only by their husband's name. So they were listed as Mrs. Mrs. Whoever. And what I have done here is where I am reasonably certain that I have the correct woman, I have put her name on there to try and give them back their names, because their husbands did not make these recipes. They did. So first of all, we have Mrs. Marguerite Fortress of Toledo, Ohio. She was a housewife, and her dish was Toledo ham, for which she won $5,000, which was the first prize overall. And then we have second prize overall was Miss Rosemary Rothschild of New York, New York. She was a freelance TV radio journalist, and her dish was Major League Rhubarb, for which she won $3,000. And then Mrs. Catherine Zimmerman of Mansfield, Ohio, who's a retired credit manager. Her dish was almond chickup, for which she won $1,500 and third place overall. And then, okay, some more prize winners. Of course, the first one on this list is the one whose her name I could not find. I could only find her husband, and I checked several different wedding announcements and things like that, and she's Mrs. Howard Walter Howard II. And her dish was citrus surprise steak. And so you can see that the winners came from kind of all over the place. Cleveland, New York, and Cleveland, Ohio. There was DC, California, Philadelphia, St. Louis, Missouri. So they were pulling from it really was a national contest. Other notes here: Evelyn Rose Peterson and Bertha Stoskus did actually get their own names in print, and so did Irma Wack. All right, so these were prize winners who didn't make the cookbook. I was trying to figure out the logic of how recipes were selected for the cookbook. These were all women who were mentioned in news articles and as having received second prize, but did not. Their recipe was not included in the cookbook. And one of them is from Mississippi. There is a Mississippi connection here. It's tenuous, but it's there. And Mrs. Joy Laverty of Jackson, Mississippi, had the further indignity of having her name misspelled in her newspaper article. She shows up as Mrs. J. Laverty, but I did some poking around and discovered that it was actually, her name was Joy. Jay was not, Randall was her husband, not Jay. Okay. Other uses of the recipes, Mrs. Catherine Zweer used the Highland pot roast as a contestant in the Mrs. Rhode Island competition in April of 1957. She did not win the contest, but the recipe got printed in the paper. I have not yet found the original author for that one. And then Mrs. Betty Nichols of Nashville, she shared harvest chicken, chicken legs piquant, and glazed carrots in an interview after she took fourth place and $2,000 in new kitchen appliances in a Why Ketchup Tastes Great contest in 1958. So these cookbooks were, or the cookbook based on this, I'm guessing it was circulating with members of the public. Maybe they got them at the grocery store. And so people were taking them home and possibly actually using them. All right, so we meet the authors and their dishes. These are the photographs that I have been able to find. Most of them are from newspapers. So here we have Rosemary Rothschild, Mrs. Zimmerman, Mr. Graham from Heinz, and Mrs. Fortress. So this is Toledo ham. This is a reminder, this is the first prize winner. It was created by Marguerite Fortress. She was a native of Charleston, South Carolina. She was living in Toledo, Ohio at the time of her win. She was the wife of a post office employee and the granddaughter of German immigrants. So the surprise ingredients for me as a cook were hard-boiled eggs and anise seed. The anise seed was also a surprise, said in several articles, a surprise to the people at Heinz. Her hobby was entering contests, and she also had some synchronicity. She was 57 at the time that she won. So what I have here is the picture from the cookbook of what this is supposed to look like, as well as the recipe. And then this is what it actually looks like when I made it. And I said my thoughts is it kind of like pizza, but with a ham base. The anise seed didn't add that much to it that I could tell. I would eat this again. I might use marinara sauce instead of ketchup, but it wasn't bad. I had reduced the proportions somewhat because I was not willing to waste a full pound and a half of perfectly good ham steak on this. So, and there's only me, and I was like, I just cannot face a pound and a half of ham steak covered in ketchup. So I did make a slightly smaller version, but it was okay. So then Rosemary Rothschild, her dish was Major League Rhubarb, which she named it, she said, because it was a big hit with all the men. She was born in Indiana and she lived in Wellesley, Massachusetts for a while. She died in New York City. She attended Vassar and she was a freelance radio TV writer. This picture here is from her Vassar yearbook. She was, if I found the right one, a lifelong participant in contests and was actually still winning them well into her 80s. So there was no picture of Major League Rhubarb in the cookbook, but here's what it looked like when I made it. So if you can see there, this recipe involves bananas for some reason. So that was my main question: why bananas? I had forgotten that rhubarb is kind of slimy, so that the rhubarb being slimy was actually a bigger detractor than the ketchup for me. It mostly tastes of apples and brown sugar, and my conclusion is that it's best hot. You really do not want to eat this cold. But I wouldn't eat this again only because the rhubarb is slimy. There was something that was very similar that was called rosy apple crumble. That was apple crumble but with ketchup, and that was pretty good. I would eat that again. The pictures weren't as good, and it didn't win any prizes, or that I know of. So that's why I went with the Major League Rhubarb. All right, so I haven't made the almond chickup yet, but Catherine Zimmerman was, like I said, she was a retired credit manager. Her husband was a guard at the Ohio Reformatory. She was born in Hungary and immigrated to the United States with her family as an infant, and she and her husband were living in Mansfield, Ohio, at the time of the contest. I think the reason I have not yet made this one is it calls for an entire bottle of ketchup, that is a lot of ketchup. I'm using the kind that has, I think it's called Heinz Simple or something like that, but it doesn't have any fake sugar in it. Just because I thought that might be the closest to what they would have had in 1955, maybe, and also because I thought it might be a little bit less sweet if it wasn't full of aspartame. Um, so this one also for some reason involves consomme, and it specifies dairy sour cream. I'm like, was there another kind? Now I suppose you could, but I just thought that was interesting. And also, this recipe, as well as many others, specifies grated processed American cheese, which I refuse. I'm not grating uh, American cheese, so I have been using grated cheddar cheese or mozzarella or some combination of those things. Okay, so here's Evelyn Rose Peterson. Her dish is called Example, which I had to say it out loud before I caught the pun. I always love a pun. She was a resident of Washington, D.C. She is the wife of an airline pilot and the mother of two. She was also an aspiring writer, so I'm sure that's why she slipped that little pun in there. And then this is the example in practice. It wasn't the first recipe that I made, but it was the first recipe where the ketchup was just too much. And in discussion afterwards, thought maybe salsa sriracha instead might work, or just like plain old marinara sauce. And then also suggestion from a colleague, Jessica Perkins-Smith, the university archivist, suggested cheese grits instead of mashed taters, and that I thought that might really do it. Like if you had sriracha and cheese grits and then the baked egg on top of it, this would probably be really tasty. And it's super fast to make also. Like that's the other thing I noticed about this. Many of these dishes are they're really quick, and they're not terribly complicated. So this is Tybee Thal Summer, or probably Tibby actually. I think I have the right Mrs. Summer here. If I do, she was born in Columbus, Ohio. I know for a fact they were living, whoever Mrs. Summer was, she was living in Philadelphia at the time of her win. And then Mrs. Tibby Thal Summer later moved to Arizona, and she was a table tennis champion well into her 80s. And then her dish was noodle pudding delight. And according to the newspaper article that I found about her winning the prize for it, it was allegedly based on Penn and Dutch tradition, according to Mrs. Summer. I grew up in the DC area, so for me, Penn and Dutch usually equated to Amish or Mennonite cooking, but she may also have been referring more broadly just to Pennsylvania German. The Dutch part of that is really Deutsch. So she may have been referring more broadly to Pennsylvania German or American German cooking. And this one, there was not that much ketchup in it, only a couple of tablespoons, and it honestly mostly tastes of raisins and pineapple. One thing I have learned is that the reason there can be so much pineapple in bizarre places in mid-century cooking is that pineapple made things glamorous. So if you wanted to make your dish fancy, then you slap some pineapple in there. That was like glamour. So this catch also will take it again. So again, so here she is. She was the wife of a commercial steak with ketchup and I want to say lemons and limes. So it was indeed surprising. I haven't made that one yet either because I haven't been able to bring myself to do that steak soon. Okay, so Bertha Stauskas, her dish was Coral Island rice casserole, and she was born in Chicago. She moved to Los Angeles with her husband. She's a child of Lithuanian immigrants, and I did find it was an early census that I found her husband was a poultry farmer. Whether or not he was a poultry farmer in 1955, I don't know, but he may have been. And her dish actually is it does involve ketchup, but it comes from a long tradition of Lithuanian cooking. So that was also there's overall there's a lot of Germans, a lot of other Eastern Europeans that are showing up. the prize winners. Okay, so these are some because the recipe matches exactly. I think it got renamed as Country Captain, which is it's a very old Southern dish, and I wonder if chicken curry maybe sounded too exotic, and Country Captain is something they thought. All right, so this was Irma Wack, chicken legs piquant. She was a homemaker from St. Louis, Missouri. She was the wife of a railroad man. He was a coal traffic director, and they were a team. She did the cooking and he did the tasting. So they worked on this recipe together until they found, until they got to the final version. Okay, so these are things that I have made, but I could not find any information about the author or creator of them. So spice nut cake, it is just one spice, nutmeg. It was a little dry, and the chocolate icing overwhelms the flavor profile. So if you're going to make this, don't go with chocolate icing. Spicy pear compote is more of pears and sauce than compote. And the sauce has compote elements, and it's actually really good, but it's really not compote. You make the sauce and then pour it over the pears. You don't cook the pears in the sauce, which I discovered when I looked up compote afterwards. I have actually made this again, the compote sauce, and put it in pumpkin bread, and it was pretty good, the pumpkin bread too. All right, so crab biscayne, this was really, really good, and I might make it too for Thanksgiving. Here I made some additional substitutions and substituted homemade cheese bread for plain breadcrumbs and added the cheese topping. This would definitely work with marinara sauce. This, from what I could tell, seems to be just a relatively common mid-century dish. They just made it with ketchup. Probably it was made with like tomato paste, or maybe even homemade tomato sauce. You could do it. All right, so Brazilian dreams. The Brazilian part of this is supposed to be chopped up Brazil nuts, and I use macadamia nuts. And this dish answers the question of, but what if pizza was crunchy? And it turns out crunchy pizza is not so terrible because it was fine. I did eat all 4 of them for dinner. It's very much a dispatch from the early frontier of pizza snacks. And the pizza snacks that we really take for granted now were still in their infancy in 1955, and the whole concept of pizza and making pizza at home still very new. So the first time that it appeared in the newspaper was in March of 1957, and then 9 times between 1957 and 1961, at which point I guess the charm of crunchy pizza wore off. So these are ham and cheese snacks. I misread the recipe a little bit here because I thought that pre-made biscuits meant frozen biscuits, but I realized as I was making it that it was actually really supposed to be like a tray that you would just slide into the oven and just cook them. So I had to improvise. I had to cook them halfway, slice them, put the mixture of canned ham and relish and cheese and ketchup on top of them, and then cook them the rest of the way. And canned ham, not my first choice of meats, but again, not terrible. And as I was making these, I was like, this is truly some god tier 2 a.m. We just got back from the club food. And if you just need something to soak up, your whatever it might be in your stomach, soak up all the alcohol, then this would be good. All right, so this is the last thing that I've made, broiled shrimp sandwich. This, the sauce on this is baffling. It has elements of both a roux and a cream sauce. So you have to add it's like butter, flour, a cup of milk, ketchup, mustard, and salt. So I'm standing there like adding the flour to the butter and stirring it. I'm like, why am I making a roux? And then adding adding the milk to it. My comment in the middle of this was I made this live on Zoom with a friend. Was I am not using my good shrimp for this, so I actually use canned shrimp. It does call for 1.5 pounds of finely chopped cooked shrimp, and I was like, no. And then this one was also really pretty good. The closest taste approximation I can get to is if you combined marinara sauce and sour cream, which I have done. I eat that regularly. But it's a little bit more ketchupy than that ends up being. So this I discovered actually the leftovers do not really make good pasta sauce. I thought they might, but no. And you also definitely want to eat this hot. It's not, you don't want to eat this cold. Okay, so things that I've been thinking about as I'm doing all of this is how this cookbook reflects contemporary food trends, such as the increasing popularity of Italian and Chinese food or Asian food. There were a handful of recipes from both of those traditions, and they were both becoming more popular at this time. Also, the interaction with contemporary food culture, like some of the fish dishes advertised in newspapers as Lenten diversions or similar during the Lenten period, during February and March, and how these dishes may have appealed to pre-Vatican II Catholics who had to eat fish every Friday, not just during Lent, but every Friday. So, which is actually why my father refused to eat fish, because his mother used to feed him canned fish every Friday. So anyway, is that there may have been other than my grandmother who went with canned fish, there were other people out there who were like, oh God, what are we going to eat? It is Friday again. How do I make this fish interesting? And the pizzas may also have been interesting at that point. And then also this cookbook in the context of mid-century modern cooking and cookbooks, and were the recipes that are familiar to me startling or challenging to home cooks, or were they more familiar? There's one recipe for chicken cacciatore, which I saw and I was like, okay, fine, chicken cacciatore, I think I can handle that. But then I also thought, but was chicken cacciatore like, oh no, I don't know about that at the time. And the cultural positioning of ketchup and or using ketchup instead of tomato sauce, like what means a lot of these recipes, honestly, I looked at them and I thought, why do you just not use marinara sauce? Like there's no need to use ketchup here. But again, like how available was jarred marinara sauce to the home cook at this time? It may not have been that available. Or it may have been like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to use that. Whereas ketchup was very, very familiar, very mass produced. Everyone knows what ketchup tastes like. Also, further investigations into the lives and the activities of the winners, getting in contact with the Heinz History Center and see if I can get the whole list of names, and make sure that I have found the right ladies. Okay, that's it. So. All right, so I will stop sharing.
Thank you that was absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed that a lot. I'm gonna see if there's any questions from anybody else before I start stealing the show. Cavi.
You were asking why some of them didn't make the cookbook, and I think that you answered that question yourself, right? Like, where do I get frog legs?
Right. Yeah. Well, that one I looked at that and I thought that one might have been a little bit too southern and a little bit too weird, because there's a recipe in there for jambalaya. Like, just please contemplate making jambalaya with ketchup, everybody. Yeah, no. And I thought, they put jambalaya in there, but not the frog's legs. And I thought, well, jambalaya, everyone's like, okay, I've kind of heard of jambalaya. If they've been to New Orleans, they probably had eaten it, and they might look at, and it's a very simple recipe. So you're looking, you'd be like, okay, I guess I could try jambalaya, you know, whereas frogs, like, they might be like, no, I'm not eating a frog. You can forget it. Okay. Someone just said in the chat, it's like listening to my grandmother talking with her neighbors. Good, excellent. That's basically where I am with this.
Michael, did you have a question? I see your.
Yeah. Again, apologies for the no camera today. I kind of feel bad in hindsight. Damn, I had my question. Where did it go? Well, first off, I absolutely love this. I love the entire presentation. It went in directions that I actually wasn't expecting to find this sort of the idea of reclaiming contest winners from mid-century misogyny was something that surprised me. I was like, oh, interesting. What brought you to the idea of using the cookbook as your sort of historical text of the mid-century period? Because just the idea of just looking at it, like, I believe everything it can be and is historical, but I've never particularly like. I'm rambling at this point, but I think you understand the question that I asked. Like,
Right.
what brought you to this particular text?
Well, okay. So there were a number of things. First of all, it's tiny, and it was something that when we got sent home in March, that I could scan on the copier and take home with me. I later bought my own copy so that I could cook with it. I like to be able to hold the thing in my hand, which I was glad I did, because that was how I discovered you can't actually cook with it, because if you get it wet, you will kill it. Which I did, and I had to pry some pages apart. But the other reason was that when it came in, and I kind of hesitated about having it cataloged, and I finally did, we actually managed to gross out the cataloger with it, because it's just the pictures are so, there is so much ketchup, y'all. And it was something that we brought out as, like, you know, look at this hilarious thing. Like, we were treating it like a joke, and I was sort of like, well, maybe I should not mock this. Maybe I should look at this a little bit more carefully. And so that's sort of the combination of things is why. And also, like, the more I read it, the more I thought about it, the more curious I was about these different kinds of food trends. And I mean, they're using this thing to try and sell ketchup, and they are suggesting with a straight face that somebody make jambalaya with ketchup, right? Or that they make chicken cacciatore with ketchup. But which, like, the more I say that, the more I'm like, ugh. But there's also some things, like the things that I've made, that are fine, that are pretty good, that you could totally eat. And so I don't know how many of you have ever heard the phrase crack taken seriously, or crack treated seriously, but that's kind of what this is. Is that I realized that as I was cooking with it, I'm like, this is possibly some sort of elaborate prank, which they delivered with a straight face. And so I am going to also attempt to consider this with a straight face. But yeah, I think the short answer is I felt bad for making fun of it. The the long answer is it was sufficiently small and focused that I felt like I could do it justice. Whereas if you had a bigger cookbook, it just would take forever. Like, you would just never get to the end, or you would have to pick, like, desserts or mains or something. Whereas I could possibly cook my way through this whole thing if I wanted to, which I may or may not. like I said, I just cannot bring myself to make jambalaya with ketchup. I just can't. Anyway.
Thank you.
There other questions? I have a couple, and these kind of got brought up more as you were responding to both Cappy and Michael's questions. I guess one thing is, like, how, because, like, right now, ketchup is it's everywhere, right? Like, and it's almost that Heinz has become like the way that Kleenex is, you know, to tissues. Like, Heinz is very much just like ketchup, but it's everywhere now. Was it the same? Like, was this like pre-ketchup, like pre I don't know, like a boom in ketchup being something that like Americans put on everything, or is it
That
like
that
them
I
trying
don't I
to?
don't my real answer to that is I don't know, but that is an excellent question. There are I have found so far 2 books that are basically histories of ketchup. Um, and one of them looks at ketchup getting beyond Heinz. Ketchup when it began, it actually, and I believe it has roots in China, and it was kind of adopted by the West over time. And then there was sort of the ongoing battle between Heinz and Hunt for market share. But the book that was just the history of ketchup actually has recipes for homemade ketchup in it. But that does not that I mean that considers the broad history of ketchup. There's one that I have found that's just a history of Heinz, but it was written. It was sort of written by a corporate shill. I mean, she probably wouldn't appreciate me describing her that way, but she organized it by the directors, and it was this person was someone that Heinz had allowed into their archives, and she had written it for them. So it's not terribly critical, shall we say. But that was one place I had gone to try and find any information at all about this contest. So I think that this was probably right at the time, or pretty close to the time, that there was an ongoing battle between Heinz and Hunt for the ketchup market.
Ketchup superiority.
You're right, ketchup superiority. So, but there's a lot of other things going on in the and I think they might have been riding a little bit of the wave of public interest in the Pillsbury Bake Off contest. Like there were a lot of contests, food-related contests going on at this time. So they're riding that wave a little bit. And then what's some other kind of I think I had more of that thought.
Well, because like it was really interesting in it to see things like a whole bottle of ketchup. So like I know that like if you buy say like a Hershey's cookbook today, like these are like companies still are making these like our product cookbook. And so like when you buy a Hershey's cookbook, it'll be like 2 bars of Hershey's. It's not like 2 cups of chocolate, right? So like you see like 1 bottle of ketchup, like that gave the ounces, but it was still very much like 1 of our bottles, like 1 of this sort of thing.
Yes.
So I wonder if it was like, I mean, I'm a medievalist, so this is just me as an American consumer speculating. But like, is it like, it's interesting that it's might be something that like you're saying, like almost like cornering the market on ketchup and like making your name that ubiquitous as because like when I think about like even Hunt's, like I don't think about Hunt's as tomato ketchup, I think about like Hunt's as like canned tomatoes or something like that. Like whereas if somebody said Heinz, like my first thought would be ketchup. Maybe they're like Heinz 57 sauce later, but like it's the same way with like you hear Hershey's and you think chocolate.
Yeah.
So it's just be interesting to see like what, I guess, even just like how much people were even eating ketchup at the time. Like now I said it's you go to a restaurant and almost every restaurant, like even the fancier ones, like they either have a bottle of ketchup on the table or you get like like the little tiny bowl of ketchup when your meal comes out. So
I have a couple of articles that I found that I have to read about the history of the use of ketchup, which is kind of why I was so interested in that terrifying illustration at the beginning of the cook with his monocle and his weird hair and his formal chef's whites. Is if they're trying to like subtly imply that Heinz is the classy ketchup, right? And then the pineapple shows up, so you're making it glamorous. So you're going to have classy, glamorous ketchup. And this with that I mean like classy and glamour was a thing definitely then. So that's why I kind of wonder is I'm like, were the people who were reading this thinking that this was not necessarily a gourmet adventure, but was it like a stretch for their cooking skills?
Yeah, that was kind of going to be my follow-up question of was going to be this idea of like food as social status. So like you'd mentioned like classing it up by the like the the fancy tomato chef at the beginning and like this use of pineapple and those sorts of things. Like with I guess you talked about like who the target audience would be like the the woman who would be buying the cookbook, who would be cooking the meals, those sorts of things. But is there an even further element of um maybe like classism in there where it's more of like a middle class sort of like, are we in that like boom of consumerism where like things are really being marketed with the like get a refrigerator, get a like these sorts of like home because that's like a big thing that's happening in the 50s, right, Cappy? I think
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask, is like what kitchen gadgets are coming out at this time, because that feeds into your question, Courtney, of what's happening in social status and on the home ec front, as it were.
Yeah,
because I do believe that the 50s that's like the period where like also like credit comes onto the market, right? Like so like you have this push towards like people buying things on credit and not outright buying them. I'm just thinking back to the American history course that I TA'd, so this is very but yeah, like I just wonder if it's like a like in that push with like the social, like what does it mean to be like, does Heinz feed into the middle class the same way like Coca-Cola fed into the middle class and those sorts of like
yeah. I mean, I think that monocle may suggest to me at least that they may have been trying to, because there's no reason for a chef to have a monocle. There's no reason for Mr. Peanut to have a monocle either. So, but I read it was a web article about Mr. Peanut that I have it's kind of living in the back of my mind that I have to go back to and look at again, and consider it in the context of that particular monocle.
yeah. And even the, I mean, just the woman that you showed that's with him is like very much a like your kind of like 1950s domestic housewife sort of like image of a woman as well, like with the curled hair and
yeah. She looks like the Jetsons. She looks like Judy Jetson to me. So
yeah. I do have one more question that's very small and actually just a because like we're so used to cookbooks now being or at least recipes online being like scroll to the bottom of this like 20-page story to get to your recipe. Are these just, is it just like your like very traditional, like here's a picture of the food that you're going to make and here's your recipe and how you do it? Or is there anything in it that gives you any like, I don't know, like how to serve it or like how to present it or, like any sort of narrative along with it?
There's no narrative with them. You may get something like, serve 6 to 8. If there's any illustrations, they're usually line drawings. They're not necessarily of the food itself. Like if you go back to the Toledo ham, the picture, the little drawing next to the recipe bears absolutely no resemblance to the final dish. There is a picture of it, so you could in theory look at the photograph and see what it's supposed to look like. But I followed the directions as given in the recipe, and you saw what I made. It looks like a pizza, but it's ham.
Right.
So I followed it as as it was written, and you saw what I got. So the art is also very interesting to me with some of the different recipes. Like I said, there's a handful that are Asian inspired, probably more specifically Chinese inspired, and they are they are a product of their time, and they are racist. And you look at the contents, the ingredient list, you think what is Chinese about this? What is Asian about this? And sometimes the answer is like, oh well, there's soy sauce, so maybe that's it. And other times it's just like nothing. So that's something also that I've been thinking about, is that they have these references to to Italian dishes and to Asian dishes or Chinese dishes, and the difference in the way that those things are presented. They also did have They had one that was called Shrimp Fiesta, that the art was sort of amorphously Hispanic, I would say. It could have been Mexican, it could have been Spanish. It wasn't really distinctly one or the other. It was slightly less racist than the ones that were Asian inspired. So that was something, and like the different strands of American food culture that are combining and twisting and in this cookbook. And the other thing that was interesting to me was how many Eastern Europeans were represented in the winners as well. I mean, the one thing that the contest entrants all had in common was many of them were lifelong contest entrants, or they were like, well, these were women who were willing to take a chance. They're willing to to roll the dice. Some of them, at least one of them was the first contest she'd ever entered, and so now she was obviously going to enter some more. But I mean, part of what was interesting to me was like the amounts of money they won. I mean, $5,000 would make a huge difference today. And in 1955, I did actually look it up. It was like the equivalent of $50,000. So it was a lot of money to win for this recipe, and some of them got asked, what are you going to do with it? And Rosemary Rothschild said she was living in Greenwich Village at the time, and she said something like she was going to get a new wardrobe, to buy a new wardrobe and get a job, or because she was the article that I found about her also said she was recovering from hepatitis. I was like, why would you tell the newspaper that? But anyway, so I was like, these amounts of money were significant. There was significant change to their household that would have been brought in by this women's labor. So that's the other reason that I'm really intrigued by this, because I was sort of like, $25,000 worth of prizes. $25,000 worth of prizes going to whom? So
That's a significant amount of money at that time.
Yeah. And I was sort of like this. I'm like, did each recipe win like $500, or how did this even work? And no, some of them, they all won different amounts of money, and that's why the other thing I wonder about is the logic of how they were assembled. Combination of things that were attractive to a broad palate, things that the average person could get in their supermarket, but how what did they have to include? Obviously they have to include the top three, but how did they pick among the others? Yeah. Like, was it like, were they all first place? Were some first and third? Was it a mixture of individuals and grocery store owners? Who was on the committee that decided which recipes got to go in? Like, these are all, I may never be able to find out, but these are things that I wonder about.
Have you been, I feel like I'm monopolizing this, but unless anybody else has any questions, have you been able to find like an initial, like an original, like, I don't even know what you would call it, like advertisement for like entering it?
I have found, yes, I have found some advertisements for entering it. Yes, I have. They were mostly in, unsurprisingly, mostly in ketchup ads, or they were part of a larger grocery store ad.
Okay. Do we have any other questions out there? No. I'm gonna ask one more just because I can. Sorry, I'm gonna pick your brain about this as much as I can. I was, again, just going back to the frog legs versus jambalaya, like why one got included and one didn't. This is, so fascinating to me and bizarre at the same time. But I wonder, this is also me going back to this idea of like class and whatever, if it's like, depending on who the cookbook was marketed towards or like intended to, like who was going to be cooking these, would it not even have just been like, or could it have not just been necessarily like who's going to have frog legs at their grocery store, but also like frog legs are something that like the elite and rich would eat, whereas like jambalaya is more of a like, it's obviously more Southern, more Cajun, but like it's still more like a common person's dish in the way that frog's legs isn't.
Well, I actually thought that the frog's legs might be the more country option and not the more elite option. And that they probably, when she made those frogs, that they probably went out and gigged that frog themselves. And that, you know, presenting this wild game option, you know, to the housewives of America.
Yeah, no.
Not gonna fly. Although I did look up where you can get frog's legs, and there is a place on the eastern shore of Maryland that will mail you frozen frog's legs if you really would like to try some.
I mean, you can get them at my local grocery store in Montreal, just as I always see them in the fish section. But I guess I was just thinking of it as something that was like, today you wouldn't see frog's legs on like your average, you know, middle level restaurant, but you might see them on your like fancy fresh French restaurant or something. So I guess that's me more thinking of what frog legs class wise would be today.
Yes.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if nobody else has any other questions, I'll probably message you with some because I'm gonna be thinking about this forever now.
Yes.
But thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed it.
Good. I'm glad everybody enjoyed it.
And I will send you the recording as soon as I figure out where it